The main Pokemon titles are infamously known for adhering to a strict, rigid set of conventions and tropes. Some find this comforting as it makes things familiar and predictable. Others find it boring and frustrating having the series stagnate, unable to tap into its full potential. Pokemon as a franchise has been explored in many different creative ways, but this is typically reserved for spin-off titles. Game Freak, the studio behind crafting the core Pokemon titles, almost never ventures off the beaten path. They prefer to play it safe and stick to what works. Legends Arceus is one of the rare exceptions to the norm, where Game Freak took a relatively substantial risk and tried something different. A fresh spin on the conventions of old. Today, we're going to explore what Legends has to offer to see if Game Freak's risk paid off. I'm going to start off with what makes Legends what it is, the catching. This is what glues the entire game together, and it will either make or break your experience with the game. If you enjoy the catching, you will have a good time. If not, then this game definitely isn't for you. What makes the catching in this game better than any other Pokemon game that has come before it is the freedom it grants the player, alongside a plethora of tools allowing the player to get creative with how they go about catching the innumerable monsters they come across in the Hisui region. The freedom and player agency is granted by allowing the player to catch any Pokemon without first needing to engage in a battle, like how it's been traditionally done since the Game Boy days. This allows you to catch a whole bunch of Pokemon in rapid succession, and it feels amazing to pull off. The satisfaction is further elevated with the introduction of the back strike. As the name suggests, you throw a Pokeball at the back of a Pokemon without having them notice you for an increased chance to capture it. The sound effect that plays when you pull this off is ear candy, with the fireworks sound that plays after a successful catch, the cherry on top. You guys nailed it. In Legends, you still have the ability to catch Pokemon while engaged in battle, and this method may be the only way to catch certain Pokemon. The Pokemon of Hisui and the overworld have varying temperaments. Some Pokemon, like Starly, are very cautious and will flee if they spot you. Others, like Shinx, are more aggressive and will attack you if noticed. When the Pokemon are in this attack state, signified by this red eye, then throwing Pokeballs at them will bounce off and no longer work. This is where initiating a battle comes in handy. Once in a battle, you can catch the Pokemon as you could before in past Pokemon titles. There is another way to catch these aggressive Pokemon without needing to engage in battle, and it can be achieved by throwing an object at them, like mud, to temporarily stun them, giving you the window of opportunity needed to catch them by surprise. Literally. The degree of flexibility granted to the player in terms of catching in this game is quite strong. There's other items that can tip the balance in your favor, like smoke bombs or silent sprays. You can also distract Pokemon with various food items. Once you get really good, you can combine all of these elements to transform yourself into a Pokemon capturing machine, gunning them down left and right and forcing them, against their will, to join your ranks in the pastures that resides within Jubilife Village. The pastures is the PC system of this game. It's nice to be able to see some of the Pokemon you caught within the pastures, but the pastures can be frustrating when it comes to managing your Pokemon, especially in a game where you're encouraged to catch everything you see. When sorting your Pokemon, instead of generating lists with what you're searching for, it instead grays out all the Pokemon except for what you want. This means you still need to manually scroll through every single box until you find what you're looking for, defeating the purpose of sorting in the first place. Even with this highlight feature, you could still miss what you're looking for if you don't look hard enough. It's a nightmare to navigate if you're looking for something very specific among hundreds of Pokemon. The catching system, as fun and freeing as it is not without its faults. There are times where the Pokeball feels inconsistent, like if you throw the Pokeball past a certain range it will bounce off of the Pokemon, even if you hit them directly without them noticing you. There's also some kind of glitch where, if you get noticed by a Pokemon and stun them, if you attempt to catch them, your Pokeball will just phase through their body, as if they weren't there standing right in front of you. This can be remedied by first locking onto the Pokemon and then throwing your Pokeball, a solution I came across by complete accident. This glitch, to be fair, was quite rare, only happening a handful of times in my 2 playthroughs, but was frustrating regardless due to burning through so many Pokeballs at no fault of my own. Random bugs and inconsistencies aside, this is by far the most enjoyable Pokemon catching experience ever crafted. The main gameplay loop, which is what you will be doing for almost the entirety of your playtime, is sufficiently enjoyable, with a few small cracks holding it back from being perfect. As I mentioned earlier about wasting Pokeballs, the Pokeballs in this game are a valuable resource. Being able to throw them with reckless abandon is fun, but that fun comes at a steep cost. you can burn through your Pokeballs relatively quickly, which is a bit of a problem because you literally need Pokeballs in order to advance in the game in a timely manner. The only way to proceed from area to area is to have the appropriate rank. The only way to rank up is to complete Pokedex entries. The best way to do that is to add new species to the Pokedex, and the only way to accomplish that is to catch them with Pokeballs. You can buy Pokeballs in the store, so problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. In past Pokemon titles, players mainly made money through beating up small children in Pokemon battles, among other trainers, to receive a cash prize. There were other ways to earn cash as well, but trainer battles were the player's most consistent and reliable source of income. Legends Arceus has no such luxury. Not only are there almost no trainer battles relative to other Pokemon titles, but even the few sparse trainer battles you're treated to have no cash prize.
Oh no, you beat me in a Pokemon battle? But I don't have any money. Perhaps there's something else you want?
That's weird because I'm 15 and
If she got a basket on her bicycle, she's too young for you, man.
There are many side quests in this game, but they too don't give any cash prizes, at least from what I've seen. Ironically, the only consistent way to make money in this game is to, well, catch Pokemon. I'm sure you can see the issue with this. You become stuck in a vicious cycle of blowing all your cash on Pokeballs in order to catch Pokemon, in order to make money, in order to buy Pokeballs. Rinse and repeat. Might not seem so bad until you realize that you need money for other things besides Pokeballs, like teaching your Pokemon new moves, upgrading moves, buying clothes, etc. One of the more annoying elements in the game is that you have limited space in your bag. This means when your bag is full, which is extremely easy to do due to the limited space you're given, you have to leave items behind, which feels really bad. You can empty your bag by shoving items into a vault, but this is rather tedious, needing to do this over and over again every 10 minutes. And there's no option to move everything from your bag to your vault all at once. You have to meticulously move each item one at a time. Well, Distant Kingdom, why not just increase the size of your bag? An excellent question, I'm glad you asked. But I'm sure you already know the answer. Yup, you need money, and lots of it, in order to get a decent sized bag to mitigate the annoyance of leaving items behind, or being forced to painstakingly empty items into your vault every 10 minutes. You can only increase the size of your bag by one additional item, and every time you do this, the next upgrade costs more. This snowballs out of control where it ends up costing thousands to fit one extra item. In order to max the bag, you would need to spend around 5 million Pokebucks, which is an incomprehensible amount of cash in this game. It's a huge money sink in a game where funds are, at least in my experience, very limited. I'm sure some of you by now are screaming at the screen that you can craft Pokeballs and that instantly solves my grievances. Not so fast, as the crafting system itself has its own unique irritants. Pokeballs can be crafted using apricorns and various types of tumblestone. You can battle a handful of Pokemon that drop these materials, but that takes way longer and the drop isn't guaranteed anyways, so it's just not really worth it. The best way is to farm them. Apricorns can be acquired by throwing your Pokemon at trees, and tumblestone can be acquired by throwing your Pokemon at ore sticking out of the ground. Simple, right? While yes, this is a decent way to get Pokeballs, it takes quite a while to farm these materials. The player character can run, but not that fast. And what's worse is that, for whatever reason, the run is limited, meaning the player character cannot run indefinitely. When they run out of stamina, they will be unable to run for a period of time and are forced to walk, slowing this process down considerably and making it even more cumbersome as a result. What about ride Pokemon, Distant Kingdom? Yeah, I was about to get to that. In this game, there are ride Pokemon that are much faster than the player character. An appreciated feature, by the way, even if the ride Pokemon aren't your own personal monsters. There's one small issue with the ride Pokemon, however. You cannot throw Pokeballs or your Pokemon while atop the ride Pokemon. This means that, in order to farm the materials needed to craft Pokeballs, you have to constantly mount and dismount from your ride Pokemon for every single ore or tree you come across. You need to do this thousands of times over the course of the game in order to circumvent spending all of your hard-earned cash on Pokeballs. Annoying is a severe understatement. But wait, it gets even better. This problem of mounting and dismounting already has a solution within the game itself. For whatever reason, when you are on the ride Pokemon in the water, you can magically throw Pokeballs and your Pokemon again. You can even do it in slow motion. Convenient, right? But the second you ride a Pokemon on dry land, that ability is inextricably stripped from you. It's a real head scratcher and frustrating beyond belief. So, as you can see, there's no real easy solution to avoid the various nuisances plaguing the core gameplay loop. Even if you find a better answer, those answers themselves have their own share of problems. It might not seem like a big deal at first, just a bit of tedium here and there, but as I mentioned earlier, this is what you do for virtually the entire game, which is about 20 hours if you blast through it. These minor inconveniences become an extreme drag once the hours start piling up. What makes this sting even more is that there are innumerable easy solutions to many of the problems I detailed above. The ride Pokemon is an easy fix that is already solved in the game. The bag could be bottomless. There could be other reliable streams of income. I could go on, but you get the point. Catching Pokemon in this game is very fun. It's just unfortunate that the ability to do so is bogged down by these minor flaws that add up into bigger headaches over the course of your run. Catching, while being the main focus of the game, isn't the only thing you can do. Next, let's touch on the battles themselves, which have had a bit of a revamp as well. The battles are not strictly turn-based this time around, as you or your opponent are able to take several turns consecutively. This is determined by a speed modifier that can be manipulated by the speed stat of the Pokemon, some priority type attacks, as well as the new battle gimmick, Battle Styles. This can really backfire on you though if you're not properly prepared, as you won't be able to act if your Pokemon is slower than the opponent. There's nothing you can do but watch as your Pokemon gets nuked in front of you, which is nightmare fuel for any player bold enough to Nuzlocke this game. It's safe to say this is one of the most challenging Pokemon games made by Game Freak, but we'll explore difficulty in a bit. The aforementioned battle gimmick features two styles, Agile and Strong. Agile decreases the base power of moves in exchange for an increase of your speed modifier. This allows you to have many turns in a row, sometimes. I guess if the modifier isn't high enough, even with the help of the Agile style, you don't get any perceived benefit, but you still get the reduction of power, which feels odd. Strong style is a bit more consistent where it increases the base power of your attack at the expense of your speed modifier, meaning that you'll hit hard but will then be effectively forced to miss a turn. Sometimes. Again, if strong style doesn't lower your speed modifier enough, you will get the increased attack damage with seemingly no drawdowns. It almost always results in the loss of a turn though, at least compared to Agile style. The hidden speed modifier definitely makes battles feel a lot less consistent or predictable, like it's out of your control and you will just lose mons without having the ability to respond. Sometimes you don't get a free turn, other times you get 3 turns in a row. If there was some way to visualize the speed modifier and observe how it's influenced and why in real time, it would be easier to play around it accordingly. Or maybe something more akin to Final Fantasy's active time battle system would have been more intuitive and would have complemented the faster, action-oriented approach Legends is going for. The hidden speed modifier is not so much an issue in wild encounters, or when you fight a trainer with only a handful of Pokemon, but you definitely notice the ambiguity of the system in longer, drawn-out fights. As mentioned earlier, there's a surprising lack of trainer encounters in this game, which is unfortunate because the remix of Gen 4's trainer battle theme is amazing. But you never really get a chance to hear it due to trainer battles ending near instantaneously for almost every single encounter, with few exceptions. What's nice about battles this time around is that they are initiated in real time, meaning if you engage in battle, you aren't teleported to a battlefield detached from the world, but instead seamlessly transitioned into a battle within the overworld itself, perfectly unifying battles with the rest of the game. This has the effect of tethering the Pokemon and trainers to the world, making the world feel more cohesive as a whole. What's also appreciated is the Pokemon physically attacking each other. As I've mentioned in the past many times, this addition serves to elevate battles by making them more engaging, and it does exactly that in this game. Physical hits feel like they pack way more punch when the Pokemon actually hit something, as opposed to swinging wildly at the air in front of them. Difficulty has always been a contentious topic when it comes to Pokemon games. Game Freak is averse to implementing difficulty settings in their Pokemon games for reasons unknown, forcing fans of the series to pick up the slack through self-restrictions like Nuzlocks. Legends Arceus is a different beast and is genuinely difficult at times. A new kind of Pokemon, called Alpha Pokemon, have the ability to wipe out your entire team if you attempt to capture them. They're larger than normal with blood-red eyes and they hit like trucks. Catching them is immensely satisfying, especially after a hard-fought battle. Even if the Pokemon you catch is insanely high level, the integrity of the game's balance is preserved by making these stronger Pokemon ignore your commands unless you are of a high enough rank to command them. A much better solution than preventing the player from catching the Pokemon at all, like what Game Freak did for Sword and Shield. Even the regular wild Pokemon pose a significant threat with their ability to gang up on you in horde-style fights. Combine this with the aforementioned speed modifier mechanic discussed earlier, and you're in for a pretty brutal time if you approach these battles carelessly. These horde encounters are turned up to 11 in a special event called Space-Time Distortions. This distorted area appears at random and allows you to encounter rare and strong Pokemon. This is a clever feature that allows the inclusion of Pokemon and items that might otherwise be questionable given the context of the Hisui region. It's also just a fun idea that invokes a strong sense of excitement and dread. The soundtrack that accompanies these spaces alongside the distortion effect really hammers home that something is wrong. The space-time distortions somewhat address the monetary bottleneck I referred to earlier, as it grants rare items like nuggets to be sold for a high price. My main issue with space-time distortions is that they are exceedingly rare. In my second playthrough, I only came across a handful, and only one of them fully formed to allow me to reap the benefits of it. So, in my 18-hour playthrough, I only enjoyed a single space-time distortion for the whole run. Pokemon games have never been exceptional story-wise, and Legends Arceus is no exception. Legends is a much darker game tonally, where the beginning of the game explicitly spells out your potential demise should things not go your way. Pokemon in the past has never shied away from darker themes, as most of the games, if not all of them, include a graveyard or something similarly dreary. In these graveyards, there's often NPCs that lament the passing of their beloved Pokemon, among other touchy subjects, and I always appreciated that. It's been a nice contrast to the cartoony, childish characterization the series is known for. Some Pokédex entries achieve a similar effect, like Drifloon, who, turns out, is a notorious child killer. Legends is definitely a step up in that department, as it often reminds the player character of their own potential death looming around the corner, most likely at the hands of some savage Pokemon. Unsettling, to say the least. You are constantly reminded that Pokemon are not the cuddly, lovable, and friendly creatures we've grown accustomed to. They are wild beasts that are dangerous and need to be handled with the utmost care. In past Pokemon games, the player was warned against entering tall grass without a Pokemon of their own to protect them, as it can be dangerous. But it never really explored past that. Legends shows you why that warning should not be taken lightly. The player character in this game can be directly attacked by Pokemon, which allows me to segue briefly into how the game plays, as well as the controls. The controls are surprisingly responsive and tight, considering that Game Freak has never done a 3D action-adventure game before. I'm genuinely impressed. The dodge roll does what it's supposed to do, and I've already praised how great the catching is in general. The player character can be brutalized by wild Pokemon if not careful, and can even take fall damage, or drown, blacking out after sustaining too much damage and losing hard-earned items from your bag as a penalty. The player character can react to attacks during battle, but doesn't take any damage. A nice touch that makes the trainer feel more engaged with what's going on around them. With more gameplay-specific topics out of the way, let's dive into the story. It starts out with the player character getting yeeted from their home into the past by Arceus, not before he upgrades your smartphone with his magical Pokemon tech. The main premise is an isekai. For those unfamiliar with that word, it's a Japanese genre of portal fantasy / science fiction, where a main character is transported to another world, a la Sword Art Online. A neat approach for a Pokemon game. The beginning is quite slow with lots of exposition. You eventually get a starter Pokemon and partake in a challenge to prove your worth. This teaches you the basics of catching. You pass with flying colors, and then for the next 15 hours the story no longer progresses until you approach the end. The majority of the game is spent tackling noble Pokemon, guardian deities of the region that have been possessed by a mysterious light. For a game based on Generation 4, one of the more lore-heavy additions to the series, I was hoping for a deeper look at some of the lore that Sinnoh has to offer, especially being foisted into a time where myth and legend become reality. Sadly, very little lore is explored, at least as far as the main campaign is concerned. There's two clans, aptly named Diamond and Pearl, that believe in their own version of Almighty Sinnoh. There was so much potential of a civil war type conflict between factions that was even teased earlier in the game, but unfortunately the two clans can be completely ignored and are inconsequential. On my second playthrough, I didn't even go to the Pearl Clan village, and it made no difference. You meet many colorful characters along the way, but their presence is ultimately meaningless for the most part. Wardens, the individuals who oversee the frenzied noble Pokemon, assist you with the tools necessary to bring them down, and that's about it. To win over the noble Pokemon, you need to throw bombs at them until you deplete their health to 0. These fights are far more action-oriented than typical battles, as it's the player character versus the Pokemon themselves. You can throw in your own Pokemon to help stun the beast to get more bombs into their face, but this turns the fast-paced action into a slower-paced, turnstile-based battle, which is very jarring when meshed together like this. Having the crazy Pokemon randomly stop and wait to be hit was definitely strange. Again, Final Fantasy's ATB system would have fit this style of gameplay more smoothly. It wouldn't clash nearly as much, as the frenzied noble Pokemon wouldn't have to wait to be attacked in order to attack back. This would also keep the player constantly on their toes. The nobles are very rudimentary when it comes to action game bosses. They have only a handful of easy to dodge attacks, and their attack patterns don't change in meaningful ways to throw you off your game. And every single one is defeated the same way, throwing bombs in their face. Having the earlier boss Pokemon be a bit easier is to be expected in order for the player to become adjusted, but there isn't a perceived, notable increase in difficulty from one to the next. There's no progression. The way you beat the first is the same way you beat the last. Dodge easily avoidable attacks and throw bombs. Arcanine is a minor exception where you need to throw bombs at his fireballs to stop him from nuking you, but aside from that, he falls just like the rest. Game Freak attempted to explore a moral dilemma regarding the nobles, with some characters questioning whether they should be quelled or not, but earlier in the story they made it clear that these Pokemon are dangerous and can very well hurt or even kill people, so the dilemma comes across as contrived as the answer is obvious. I wish the noble Pokemon were more involved in the story. You hear a bit about what Kleavor has done, and Kleavor has a nice intro showing its devastating attacks by taking out a tree, but that's the extent of their contribution. Seeing them out and about in the world and the damage they cause would affirm your actions to take them down, and it would complement the overarching theme that Pokemon are terrifying creatures. But from our point of view, with the minor exception of Kleavor, the frenzied noble Pokemon are confined to their respective arenas. A sorely missed opportunity. To further illustrate this point, I will include a clip of myself speculating about something similar before Legends Arceus released. According to the official site, it also sounds like these noble Pokemon, and potentially others, are able to manipulate surrounding areas in various ways. Kleavor, for example, can leave peculiar markings on trees, or fell them entirely, tipping the player off that a Kleavor may be in the area. A wonderful addition that could have many great gameplay implications if executed properly. A field of charred grass could signal a fire Pokemon nearby. A lake frozen over could signal a powerful ice-type Pokemon in the area. There's so many applications and world interactions that would be possible with such a mechanic. Hopefully Game Freak capitalizes on it, as it would make the world feel more dynamic and alive. Game Freak, as we all now know, did not capitalize on such a fascinating concept. Maybe one day. Anyways, 15 hours later after you take out all the nobles, the story picks up again and pieces start moving. One of my favorite parts of the game is the Palkia Dialga event where the sky adopts an ominous purple hue. This is then blamed on the main character and you're banished from Jubilife. This adds a layer of weight and stakes that were not present up until this point. You need to go through a couple of trials with the Lake Trio to get the red chain, and then you make your way up towards Spirit Pillar. In the past, the player needed to go through Mount Coronet, a challenging task that required proper preparation and vigilant determination. But in Legends, all it takes is going down a long hallway, humorously named Stone Portal. I like the surprise battle with the canteen guy who is secretly a badass ninja. Once you run through him, you get to smack around the commander, and then you're treated to a fun cutscene with one of the Gen 4 box legends. Which box legend appears depends on which clan you chose prior to this encounter. Yet another glimpse of a Civil War type conflict where you pick sides and the story changes as a reflection of your choice. A small taste of what could have been. You catch the box legend, do another mini side quest to get a special cherish ball made by your rival, one of the only noteworthy things they do for the entire game, and then you head back up towards Spirit Pillar one last time to witness one of the best cutscenes in any Pokemon game ever, with the box legend protecting you from the other in a climactic, explosive confrontation. You also learn why Spirit Pillar looks the way it does in Diamond and Pearl. A fun nod. While the lead up to the final battle was really cool, the final battle itself isn't anything but. The box legend takes on a new ancient form, both of which look hideous by the way, and then they play exactly like any other of the 5 noble Pokemon you took out earlier. I would argue Dialga/Palkia are one of the easier ones in the game, when they should be one of the hardest. You catch it, and that's it. I was hoping for a fun, celebratory reunion in the credits similar to Sun and Moon, but instead we get a bunch of pictures. The picture at the very end is what I had anticipated, and while the art is nice, it leaves me wanting more. All in all, a rather subpar narrative that had serious potential for far more compelling story beats that were teased but didn't go anywhere. The postgame mainly revolves around catching every single Pokemon for the opportunity to face off against the titular character, Arceus himself. Some Pokemon were difficult to obtain, with cryptic requirements that were reminiscent of the Gen 3 trio. Others were tedious, like Spiritomb, who can only be encountered after you collect over 100 wisps littered throughout the world. But before the fated battle against God himself, the player is in for a nice surprise. In probably my favorite Pokemon battle ever, you face off against Cynthia's evil ancestor Volo, who is a traditional Pokemon boss battle that has even more phases than the action-oriented noble Pokemon in this game. Not only do you have to take out Volo's entire squad consisting of major threats, but he summons Giratina to fight alongside him in one of the coolest twists in Pokemon I've ever seen. I was beyond hyped when it happened. The lack of voice acting in the game makes the cutscenes fall a little flat, but even then it was still really awesome to see. If you manage to take out the surprise Giratina, then you're rewarded by facing off against its origin form in an epic mid-battle transformation that reminded me of the good old days of Mega Evolution. Only after taking out Giratina for a second time do you overcome the gauntlet that is Volo, a satisfying and well-earned victory. The Arceus battle was not as cool as the Volo-Giratina fight, but Arceus is definitely a step up from the rest of the noble Pokemon, having faster attacks that require a bit more precision with your dodge roll. Once you take out Arceus, he joins your team and hands you the legend plate that makes Arceus' signature move, Judgment, always super effective against his opponent. A really cool reward for a surprisingly enjoyable postgame. Legends Arceus is the first game since Pokemon Yellow where I went out of my way to complete the entire dex, and it was a pleasant experience tracking all the critters down, with a few exceptions. Seriously, Spiritomb sucks. In this part of the review, I'm going to go over my thoughts and feelings on various different things, so let's start off with the graphics. The graphics of the game are definitely rough around the edges for sure, quite literally in some cases. Whenever the player enters certain caves, a glitch occurs around characters that envelops them with a jagged white line that looks downright terrible. For being the third Game Freak Pokemon title on the same console, you would expect the games to evolve graphically, as we saw in past generations that shared consoles. Instead, there are noticeable regressions from each iteration, which is beyond confusing. Almost like instead of building off of what came before, Game Freak instead tries to reinvent the wheel every single time, with mixed results. Some funnier graphical optimizations involve the Pokemon. To increase the draw distance of the Pokemon, Game Freak can be seen utilizing lower poly models, but they're still close enough that you can see when they switch over to the higher poly models. This is especially noticeable for Ghastly, whose eyes become jagged until you get close enough for them to smooth out. This too can be seen when in battle. Normally swapping the models is masked by not swapping them directly in front of the player, but I digress. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention the player character can move around in battles. A fun little quirk that lets you literally run away from Pokemon when things become a bit dicey. The draw distance of the Pokemon have been increased a fair amount, thanks to the utilization of the lower poly models. This makes the Pokemon model pop-in far less distracting compared to what it was in Sword and Shield. Speaking of pop-in, the terrain pop-in is pretty bad this time around due to the increased scale. Foliage is one thing, but when you have entire rock faces contorting, it can definitely take you out of the experience. Haven't really seen that in other similar games, at least not to such an extent. Pokemon come in various sizes. This has the effect of addressing the scaling issue that has been a chronic blemish for every single Game Freak 3D Pokemon title. This adds an additional layer of personality and uniqueness to each Pokemon that I really appreciate. And more importantly, the big Pokemon are big, perfectly preserving their intimidating stature that is truly a sight to behold. In this game, you can throw your Pokemon out of their Pokeballs in most areas, a charming feature that feels like the wholesome moments in the anime where Ash and friends throw out all of their Pokemon and enjoy each other's company. Unfortunately, that's as far as the bonding goes, as not a single one will follow you. Legends would be perfect for follow Pokemon, so it's a shame to see that feature inexplicably removed yet again. Jubilife Village is the central hub of the game and the place you must return to after each mission. You must also return here in order to move from place to place. Another minor inconvenience. You can't go from Obsidian Fieldlands to Crimson Mirelands. You can view the map of these places, but you cannot fast travel between any of them. You must first go back to Jubilife Village and only then can you pick where you want to go. This makes the world feel disconnected and smaller than it otherwise would if you could freely come and go from anywhere in the world. As for the hub itself, it's like any basic Pokemon city, except the people are eerily lifeless. Like, literally none of them move. It's as if their walk cycles have glitched out somehow. Even the kids, who are normally depicted as energetic, playful, and unable to sit still, are seen casually sitting around indefinitely. This dude on the bridge who looks like he has places to be is awkwardly frozen in the middle of said bridge. The bustling Jubilife village is reduced to a ghost town filled with mannequins. One nice thing about this area is the music. It dynamically shifts over time until the end where it incorporates the Jubilife City theme within the Jubilife Village theme to signify its growth over the course of the game, and to foreshadow what is later to become. The village is physically expanded as well to illustrate this growth and to convey a sense of time passing, albeit only to a very small degree. In the beginning of the game, there are scaffolds in front of Galaxy Hall that are later replaced by a dude giving out experience candies, and the Ginkgo Guild. It would have been cool to have the city expand in even more ways as the game progressed to further demonstrate its development into a more modernized settlement. Having the village be a character in and of itself is a great concept that barely scratched the surface in this game. In one of the earlier side quests, a dude in front of the Galaxy Team headquarters asks for a Wurmple, a super easy and highly effective way to convey the passing of time and overall progression of the world would be to have the Wurmple evolve. One example of countless to flesh out the concept of a living, breathing village. While on the topic of growth and development, that is something I wish was applied to the player character. While yes, the player character ranks up, the growth/development is strictly external, as opposed to internal. What I mean by that is the character's inherent abilities never change throughout the entire game, with the sole exception being the dodge roll that is taught to you by your rival earlier on. Aside from that, the player character does not grow or develop. You as the player can become better at controlling the character, but the character itself does not change. You gain access to new Pokeballs that have differing properties. For example, the Heavy Ball makes back strikes more effective, and Wing Balls travel farther than others. What would have been an incredible idea is to instead implement these features into a skill tree for the player character to unlock. So instead of locking these abilities behind external objects like Pokeballs, they could be internal, inherent characteristics of the player character that could be upgraded further the higher your rank becomes. By the end of the game, you could go from a rookie trainer hardly able to catch a single Pokemon to an absolute beast capable of catching anything you set your eyes on. This progression system for the player character would be appropriate given the more action-oriented approach of Legends Arceus. So much so that I'm shocked they didn't implement one. As good as the catching is in this game, it does grow stale after a while without spicing it up by unlocking abilities that make it more enticing and rewarding. I've touched on the music a couple times already in this review, but it's overall very good and complements the game. A lot of the tracks are refreshing remixes of past Gen 4 pieces. The more original tracks hold up their own and contribute a great deal to the overall atmosphere of each location, or even the time of day. My biggest gripe with the music is that the tracks aren't used enough. There are long stretches of gameplay where no music plays at all. They don't loop like in other traditional Pokemon games. I really like music, especially video game music, so when I'm left playing for long stretches of time without any, it feels like something is missing. And even if the music does play, it is often interrupted whenever a wild Pokemon spots you, which is basically all the time. Exploration in this game is alright, although I wish your Pokemon were more involved in the exploration process. Aside from battling, there are some rocks they can smash to open up new areas, something I enjoy, but that's about it. And there's only a handful of these rocks. They could have maybe added more obstacles like trees that require specific Pokemon to clear the way to help you proceed. This would further incentivize encountering new types of Pokemon. As for subsequent playthroughs, there's a few problems. Once again, no option to skip text bubbles makes subsequent plays an unnecessarily harrowing ordeal. I often find myself lacking the motivation to play, mainly due to the limitations of the gameplay loop discussed earlier, as well as the often meandering, drawn-out, unskippable dialogue sequences. Even if you catch every single Pokemon you come across in any given area, I found that it's not enough to proceed in the story due to being insufficient to rank up, forcing me to go back to make up for the missed experience. All in all, Legends Arceus is a decent Pokemon adventure. The catching is very strong and definitely holds the game up, but is itself held back by systems bogged down by their respective flaws. The story and proceeding post-game, while not groundbreaking by any means, except for Volotina, has its moments. The potential of this game is unlike any other Pokemon game, and I hope the Legends series is able to create its own distinctive branch so that this new formula can be explored more thoroughly. That's all for this review. As always, let me know your thoughts down below as I read every comment. Looking forward to hearing from you guys. Scarlet and Violet are on the horizon, so stay tuned for videos covering those games. Till next time.